Pat Tate didn't want to spend Christmas in prison. So whilst he's in the magistrates' court at Billericay, sort of motorbikes pulled up outside. Pat was a huge man, absolutely huge, right? His chin, the police officer in the court who were guarding him, vaulted over the dock, run through the court, hopped on the motorbike and disappeared. And he's washed up in Spain where two hugely respected brothers from Essex, Billy and Eddie Blundell, had a place out there. And they took Pat under their wing, looked after him and helped him out, basically.
Pat Tate, I spent a bit of time with in Spain when he was on the run. After he escaped from magistrates' court, apparently went over the top and got out. But I found him a very nice geezer. He ended up in Spain and I'd gone over there, but in them days, if you remember rightly, all the villains were there.
I don't know if it's common knowledge that our family is Spanish. My first language was Spanish. I had to learn to speak English as a kid. Well, all our family stretched from Malaga to the point of Puerto Santa Maria and inland to a place called Jerez de la Frontera. So we got lots of family in Spain. So if anybody was plotting up or looking after.
Well, basically what happened was I was out there spending a lot of time, because I had a place out there at the time, so I was spending a lot of time there. Puerto Banús was the place. Everybody was there. The Gold Bullion mob was there. The Security Express mob was there. The Cougaran mob was there. I really got on well with him. I liked him a lot, but obviously he wasn't on drugs at the time, you know, and the stuff that happened consequently, obviously, you know, once they start putting drugs up their nose and mistreating other people, then obviously people are going to get to dislike them.
I started working at Hollywood's Ipswich and been accused of being in a £495,000 armed robbery, right, a Group 4 hijacking. Now, the people that Flying Squad say were involved in this robbery was Tony Tucker, me, Dave Corston, a fellow who's dead now called Dave Redwin. You've got another fellow who's alive, and you've got another fellow who was pulled in and questioned, they said was the gunman, but he was released. He's never been charged to this day. Well, what happened was it was an armed robbery in East London, a hijacking. Nearly £500,000 went missing, and it was 7 months after this robbery that we got arrested. Well, 3 of us got arrested. So what it was, after interviewing me and John Aiken, the van driver, get remanded at Chelmsford Jail. Now, the minute I walked in Chelmsford Jail, 18 stone at the time, all roided up and stuff, the first person I bumped into who really ran the jail back then was Patrick Tate. Right? Straight away, we had a conversation, all this sort of thing, and I've got the utmost respect for Pat. You know, I even named my eldest son after him, Tate Corston, who's nearly 26. So that's how much respect I've got for him.
In the 70s, Pat was just a teenager and I was in my early 20s. He had an aura about him, but Pat got involved in bodybuilding, and once he started taking steroids, there was a change in his personality. I would say he was more aggressive and less calm. He was always a little bit agitated. From then on, he started getting in trouble with the police. This isn't the Pat Tate that I knew, and as a result, we distanced ourselves from one another. Then Pat got in trouble again, and I didn't see him for a while.
People know about jails, 1, 2, 3s, the landings. He got me down straight away from the freeze with him on a job with the cleaners, and the person I was banged up in the next cell to Tate with was Nip Ellis for 7 months, who actually shot Tate later on. We trained together, we ate together, had laughs together for 7 months. Then at the end of 7 months, Pat had the only single cell in Chelmsford Jail. Every other cell was doubled up. When Pat got sent to Swaleside to start his 10-year sentence, I moved into his single cell, which was the only single cell in Chelmsford Jail.
I first met Pat Tate in 1989 when I was in Chelmsford. That's where Pat was. Pat Tate turned up in Chelmsford. He was massive, you couldn't miss him. And he used to go down the gym. I used to train, try and do my bit of training. And Pat and I became mates, used to train together. I got out in 91, but Pat had already got 10 by then, 10 years. So he was down in Swaleside. I used to go down and see him. We stayed in touch, became good mates, and when he got out in 94, he came to stay with me in my flat. Sarah, his girlfriend, was pregnant, or I think she'd given birth then, and she didn't have room in her flat, so Pat came and stayed with me, and we sort of led our life, criminal activities. Through him, I got introduced to Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe.
He was naive, really, Tucker was, in the drugs world. He was naive, but Pat Tate. They had a chance meeting in a cafe in Southend, and he knew everything about drugs. He knew more about drugs than most chemists, you know what I mean? Tate was a bit of a complex character, really. Pat Tate, the nice guy, and Pat Tate, the junkie, you know what I mean? When Pat wasn't on gear, which was very rare when I knew him, by all accounts, he was a very, very nice person. You know, his ex-missus has said, you know, he was a lovely guy, and he was involved in the car trade. Everyone who dealt with him in the car trade said he was a nice guy.
Whenever a prison officer needed a car, Pat would ring me and say, could you supply a car? Because of the trust he had in me, and he knew how fussy I was with cars. Because you can imagine, couldn't you, if I sold a wrong car to a prison officer, what damage it could probably do to Pat. It would make him very uncomfortable in prison. So that's what I'd done over the years while he was in prison.
Pat Tate. I had met him several years previously when I was a DI at Brentwood. There had been a number of offences of robbery committed, and Tate was actually serving a term of imprisonment for armed robberies, and I went to the prison to see him to try and clear up what I thought had been committed in our area that he hadn't been charged with. And at the prison, I sat in an office with a colleague of mine, and Tate came into the room, and I've never seen such a big man. He filled the doorway completely. He was a giant of a man. And he sat opposite me within the prison, and I outlined to him what offences I thought he had committed, and he just looked at me for 15 minutes while I spoke. He then stood up, turned round and walked out, and didn't say a word to me.
Tate revealed that he'd met these interesting people, useful people in prison, who were Darren Nichols, Mick Steele and Jack Wilmes. Steele was like a pal of old of his, and who he'd met in prison. And he only got to know Nichols and Wilmes through Steele.
Michael Steele was opposite Jack's room. Next to me was Darren Nichols, all on the same wing. After about a fortnight, Pat Tate arrived from Swaleside, where Steele would originally come from. Steele kept to himself, educated man, an engineer. He was in for importation of drugs. He was a pilot. Darren Nichols, he was in for money laundering. He was selling drugs in Honestly Bay, kept the drugs in their light. I'd describe my brother like Steele, really, because I always thought it's strange that they was room to room and they clicked. They was both into engineering and they got on like an house on fire.
He came out of prison in the summer of 1994, so in fairness to him, he did make a big effort to go straight. His Mrs. Sarah Saunders had a friend who was in the car trade, and she convinced him to lend Pat quite a lot of money, really, to buy stock for cars and things like this. Pat set up this car front. When he sold the cars, he'd either stick it in his arm or shove it up his nose.
I grew up in the East End in 50s and 60s, and it was only idiots that took drugs. That's how it was. Pat was part of that change, but you knew there was another side to him now. It just come off of him. You could see there was another side to him.